Hi fabulous and amazing English 102 students. Welcome to video 3, Rhetorical Triangle and Rhetorical Appeals. So today we're going to talk about the rhetorical triangle and rhetorical appeals that we get from the rhetorical triangle. So I have a representation for you. This is called the rhetorical triangle. Again, this is a visual representation of how rhetorical elements function in relation to each other to create rhetorical appeals. And in that you see logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos, we're talking about specifically about organization. Pathos, we're looking specifically at emotional appeals and target audience. And ethos, we're attempting to establish credibility. Okay? So these are our three main elements in the rhetorical triangle. So what does that mean? Target audience and emotional appeals connected with pathos. This means we're looking at who is our target audience, how do we know, and then how are we persuading them? What sort of rhetoric are we using to persuade them? What sort of strategies are we using to persuade them? And then ethos, again, we're looking at credibility. So how are we working to establish credibility in our piece? So how are we making it seem like we know what we're talking about and what's best? And then logos, again, is dealing with organization. So how are we organizing our rhetorical elements to make the most effective argument? All of these elements work together to create rhetorical appeals. There's no hierarchy here. So each individual element that's represented, they're all of equal importance here. They're all represented equally. The rhetorical triangle expresses how these elements work together, how they are actually connected. So, for example, we might establish pathos by using word choice or language. Again, and with pathos, we're looking at emotional appeals and target audience. So we might use word choice or language, but then we also might use word choice or language also to establish credibility. So this could be the difference between using formal and informal language, professional or conversational language. It really depends on the target audience about which is going to appeal best to them for what specific purpose. And then this could also be the difference between personal experience or using outside research. And with outside research, we mean research beyond the self. So looking at more than personal experience for something like this. So we do see an overlap with all of these categories, and that's what these arrows that go both ways represent, that these things are interconnected. So we see some overlap here. And the rhetorical triangle, again, is used to analyze and evaluate arguments. So we want to use this as a kind of checklist for our own arguments and even for our own sources that we're examining. So we want to make sure all of these elements are equally represented in our argument. No matter what kind of argument style we're creating, we want to make sure that we have a strong representation of all of those components that we see in the rhetorical triangle. So again, logos, pathos, ethos. When an element is overrepresented or underrepresented, for example, if we ignore logos and ethos, but we overemphasize pathos, this means that we could run the risk of creating logical fallacies, and we want to stay away from creating logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are defects or errors in reasoning in the argument, which produce unsound arguments. And there are two main categories of logical fallacies. The first is formal, and this deals with when the premises of an argument are incorrect or do not logically lead to a conclusion. So for example, in your Joining Academic Conversations book, that example that deals with all cats are mammals, that's actually a formal logical fallacy. So you can see that in the introductory material in your Joining Academic Conversations book. But what we're mostly going to be focusing on for this semester would be the informal logical fallacies, and that's when rhetoric or reasoning or organization of information is not presented logically or reliably. And there's a list of logical fallacies in your Joining Academic Conversations book, so you get a few specific ones. This is just an introductory list. There are more beyond that. So why is it even important that we discuss logical fallacies? Well, if we can pinpoint logical fallacies or defects within arguments, it's easier to compose a counter-argument. It's an effective way to deal with opposing sides of a topic or subject. So you can destabilize an opponent's argument by examining the use of the rhetorical triangle. It's a really effective strategy. Look for logical fallacies in your everyday life. It's election campaign season, so it's a good year for spotting logical fallacies. Now, keep in mind that logical fallacies are not necessarily ineffective arguments. They do have the power to persuade an audience. Logical fallacies are just not legitimate or sound arguments. They're sort of a cheat. The problem with unsound arguments comes when we approach an educated audience. So when an educated audience spots a logical fallacy, they're gonna zero in on that and destabilize the argument and create an even stronger counter argument out of that. Your goal is to avoid producing logical fallacies. In English 102, we want to produce effective arguments that will stand up to critique. So use the rhetorical triangle to analyze, evaluate, and construct your own arguments in this class. Thanks for watching.